another lovely morning. So the fingers are good.
Yeah, they look good. They look a lot better.
My doctor just told me to wash my hands several times a day with soap that doesn't have any dyes or perfumes in it. So ran over to Target, found, because there's a company that sells toilet paper that it's all 100% recycled paper at Target. So I'm like, I know they have cleaning products. So they did. They have one that doesn't have any dyes or perfumes. Feels better. Was able to trim my fingernails. That was good. That was starting to hurt. I'm like,
Right.
So that's all good to go. And hopefully by the time this episode goes out, maybe all the dried remnant blood will be gone and I'll have full feeling in my hands. But the ring finger is good. I just got to wait for new skin to grow, and then they're pretty sure that the graft took on my pinky. So it's just a matter of giving it time, and things will go. So that was my week. Also my cat he's been sick.
Poor cat.
And I'm not sure, because he seems to be done with that now. But for 3 days in a row, he was randomly throwing up, and he doesn't make noise when he throws up, so you find out when you step in it.
Oh.
Which is loads of fun. But he stopped throwing up. So I was trying to trace it back, and the only thing I could think of was the kitty treats we were giving him. Because I use them to lure him out of my office here. And he's the only one that eats those.
Yep.
It had an August 2025 date. So
They do expire.
So
I don't know.
So I'm like, maybe if it's, we're still looking, 8-9 months before they expire. But I'm going, I've had them for 4 or 5 months. So
Yeah, and I know some diehard cat lovers that put all their treats in the fridge and treat it like those kind of products, like mayonnaise.
Oh, really?
Like how you open mayonnaise, you have to put it in the fridge.
Yeah.
And I know some cat lovers that do it that way. I personally don't.
I don't. I never have.
My little kitten just probably, I think, a year now old, ate almost an entire poinsettia and is still alive and hasn't puked at all. So
oh my God.
I think my cats are immortal.
Oh gosh.
I heard they're quite poisonous to cats, or at least it
Yes.
irritates their stomach to where they'll throw up. Nope, nothing.
Does your little kitty go outside?
Nope.
No. Okay.
I don't allow my cats to go outside.
Okay.
They're all inside cats. But no.
So yeah, you would know if they were puking. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it was, but he seems to be okay, and I tossed all those treats. Just not going to chance it.
I tend to have to do that with my dogs sometimes with those large dog food bags. And you get back down to the bottom and you have to change sometimes because they'll start throwing up, and it's like, oh crap.
Yeah, and the cat food we get, I used to get the big 12-pound bag. It's now 11 pounds. And our old cat, Harvey, chowed down on that stuff, so not an issue. But since Harvey passed away, they eat less. So we did add another cat, so Aaron never got to meet Harvey. So we still have 3 cats, but the 3 of them eat less hard food. They're smaller cats than Harvey was. Yeah. And so I had to switch to the small 5-pound bag because I was having that same issue. The food would go bad, and then if I got it at the wrong time, there's no preservatives or anything in the food either. I just had one instance of getting to the bottom of the bag and there's little worms. Oh, that was awful. So and that happened many, many, many years ago. So as soon as I noticed, I think it was the second bag when I noticed they just weren't getting through it, I was like, all right, we're going to the smaller bag, and the smaller bag is working perfectly. I'm not sure what we're going to do once another cat passes away, because I don't know if the 2 of them can get through the whole thing. and I like the food that we get for the cats. So I don't want to switch off it, but I also don't want to be chucking food every month. That's silly too. So, and speaking of, cats being ill and paying attention to them and helping them get better, we're going to talk today about a doctor in early Scottsbluff who she did whatever it took to help get her patients better. Most people who were raised here in the valley have heard of Dr. Fix. I don't know if you have. I know there's people that have lived here their whole life that haven't.
Yeah, no, I've heard.
Okay. I was going to say, I'd be surprised if you hadn't. Most people can tell you about her trick with the silver dollar, but if you ask them for more information about her, they really don't know anything else. And she's a fascinating woman who thrived here in the late 1800s as a doctor, and I've been wanting to do the story for a while. It's just taken a while because, normally I like to read stuff and quote from things and parse here, there. It's very easy to put the story together. Dr. Fix's information is a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit somewhere else. Even when I had gone down to the Legacy of the Plains Museum the first time to get information on her, it was stored in 3 places, and then the next time it was stored in 2 places, and they said they had hoped to get her ledger in with everything else, and I don't know if they ever did. I just had pictures of everything, and that's what I was working on, because when I went down a few months ago, all they had was the file in the filing cabinet, and I'm like, yeah, that ledger / autobiography is not here. I don't know where it is, and the folks that were there were like, well, we're not sure, and we're sorting out the back room. And one thing I do give them credit for is I've been in that back room recently, and it is much more organized than it used to be.
It used to be a mess.
Yes. And I know Dr. Fix's, I'm going to call it an autobiography. It was her little ledger where she would write stuff down, and it kind of is like sort of autobiography. Was in a different place, and it's part of a different collection, I think. So I don't know if they could move it out. It's confusing, but anyway, normally I'll say, I'm going to read from this thing Connor wrote, and I can't do that all the time here because some of the documents didn't have an author. And some of the documents said this information was collected by this person from several different documents. So how do you cite the document when you don't even know who did the document? It's just the volunteer archivist did it. So in that sense, this episode will be a little different. But I had some online links and some not online links, lots of pictures. So Dr. Fix was a bit of a celebrity in the North Platte Valley, and people who know of her, think she was pretty cool. She was the first female doctor in the area, settling in Minutair for a while before moving on to Gearing. Her life during the late 19th century is really fascinating to me. She wasn't the only female doctor to eventually reside in this area, but I think she has the biggest story and a little short autobiography in that ledger, which made her interesting to me because, she wasn't purposely doing an autobiography, but she was noting things down. She also had a longtime companion, Ida McCumsey, and there is a document that Ida wrote that's in the archives at the museum about her friend. So that's kind of really our only first-person source that we have other than the stuff that Dr. Fix wrote in her ledger. So I do want to credit some folks at first because it's hard for me to credit them later when I'm quoting things. So some of the folks that have written or talked about Dr. Fix over the years include Goldie Howard, Barb Netherland, Louis Grasmick, Julie Berry, and Estelle Laughlin, Sarah Hinman, and Ida McComsey. And Ida was a lodger in Dr. Fix's home for a long time, and they were friends because of that, because they lived in the same house for so long. And from what I gather, Estelle Laughlin did the most extensive research on Dr. Fix and what we have. So in addition to her little notes of her own, these are the folks that I'm relying on, the things that they gathered together to save and document her life. So one time when I was down at the museum, the archivist there, who went on to become the director and then left, so this is a good while ago, it showed me this typed up manuscript of her autobiography. I don't know what else to call it. It's like the Bill Grasmick thing. He typed up 13 pages. Here's my life. So it is an autobiography, even if it isn't like what we're used to, 400 or 500 page thing. And it was separate from everything else. I don't know if they ever got it. I don't want to say I don't know if they didn't ever get it together, because when I was there a few months ago, it wasn't with everything else, and the folks that are there now didn't know where it was. So I don't know what happened to it. It's probably there in the archive somewhere, and they just
lost.
And because it was in someone else's collection, my guess is it's still in that collection, and they just don't realize that's where it's at.
Sure.
That would be my guess. And she wrote most of this stuff down when she was near the end of her life and living in California. But one thing that made me smile when I had read that originally, and it's kind of stuck with me, was Dr. Fix didn't know if anyone was alive even then, when she was alive, who would remember Georgia A. Arbuckle. And here we are more than 100 years later, still talking about her. So, yeah. We not only remember her, but we have a lot of admiration for her and the things that she did. So Dr. Fix was born in Princeton, Missouri on April 26, 1852. We don't know much about her early life, other than she was described in Pioneering in the Shadow of Chimney Rock in Chapter 17 by Leon Moomaw. And I don't know if you've driven past Moomaw's Corner there, that turnoff to Baird. Yeah, that's their family's property.
Okay.
And I don't really know a lot about the fountain at Moomaw's fountain.
I guess I don't know much about it either.
One day I'll have to find that out. Maybe it is only a 5-minute story, but I'll figure it out anyway. Anyway, Leon Moomaw wrote this book, Pioneering in the Shadow of Chimney Rock, and he described Dr. Fix as a dark-eyed, determined, energetic young lady. And in another article that I'm not sure what newspaper or magazine it was in, it's been cut out and saved in the museum. I'm just not sure where it was from. But that article described her as a striking woman, tall and strongly built, with a heavy coil of black hair and intelligent, wide-set eyes. Her complexion was dark, and gossips around town said she had Indian blood. One article mentions that people wanted to see the hook-nosed Indian medicine woman. And I included that because we have gossips today. They're never going to go away. And they, for whatever reason, they decided because she had this really thick, dark hair, she must be Native American. And then they, didn't like the way her nose was. And I have pictures of her, full and side view. It doesn't look like a hook nose to me. I don't know, whatever. They're gossiping, and they're just going to find every little thing they can to make fun of her. So Muma's book documents that her father passed away when she was about 9 years old, and her mother later married Thomas Reeves, who made every possible assistance to his stepdaughter. She had a little half-brother, Billy Reeves, and her mother, Julia Ann Arbuckle, was a single mother from Ohio. So she somehow got from Ohio to Missouri, got pregnant with Georgia, and we have no idea who her father originally was. But every account I've read of Thomas Reeves took well care of her, encouraged her to get educated, treated her as his own daughter. So even her last name, Arbuckle, was her mom's maiden name. So we don't even know. And we don't know the circumstances of that relationship either.
Sure.
It's just not documented. Her mother suffered from consumption, or what we know today is tuberculosis, which I think is kind of how Georgia's life started to take a particular turn. It's presumed her mother died when she was a teenager, and, Thomas Reeves still took care of her and helped her and encouraged her to keep being educated and moving on with life. But I found one article that said it's presumed her mother died, but nothing definitive. So there's big gaps there in what she was like when she was younger. And, there weren't the people around today like me that would want to document, well, where did you grow up? How come you didn't have a dad? What made you want to be a doctor? The news business just wasn't in that state at that point in time. You may have come across a newspaper reporter like that from time to time, but in general, not all of them were like that. So Goldie Howard was interviewed in the Gearing Courier's Thursday, November 13th, 1980 edition, where she shared several tidbits about Dr. Fix that she had learned. Before Dr. Fix turned 16, she had already obtained her teacher's certificate and was teaching school in Missouri. And if I remember correctly, I read in a couple of other places she got that certificate when she was 15.
Oh, interesting.
So, you and I have worked with 15-year-olds. Not a lot of them are going to have any kind of certifications at 15. When we see kids graduate from high school and they have their CNA or their welding certificates, they get them when they're 18. And you're like, wow, that's really good, that you knew what you wanted to do. That's still 3 years later than Dr. Fix.
Yeah.
So at some point in time, Dr. Fix had lived with Dr. and Mrs. Dinsmore in Macon City, where she was studying homeopathy under Dinsmore's tutelage. From what I gathered from the little bits here and there, I think once her mom passed, her stepdad was like, you need an education and someone that can take care of you because I got to go work. And so the Dinsmores were those people, and they were kind of her guardian.
Oh, gotcha.
So her stepfather continued to encourage her, and when she showed an interest in medicine, Dinsmore and her stepdad were just like, yeah, wait here, learn this stuff. I found one article that said she struggled learning Latin, which any doctor needs to know those Latin words.
Yeah, my husband's incredible with Latin. It goes... So it's getting easier over time, but yeah, it can be hard.
Yeah.
I don't realize how much you use it every day in English, but once you start to realize what they are, it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah. That's one thing that I was saddened by when I moved here, that the public school system doesn't do roots anymore and prefixes and suffixes, so that you can look at a word and go, I don't know what that word is, but I can break it down. And the root word, if you know the Latin root word, you can kind of figure it out. And then the prefix and the suffix, if you know how prefixes and suffixes work, then you can figure out what the word is, and you don't need to go ask a teacher or an adult or someone else
Yep.
because you can figure it out on your own, and they just don't teach that anymore. And I'm going, that helped me immensely, and I think it helped me as well when I started taking French, because if you go back far enough with French, it's partially derived from Latin. So some of those words, even if I didn't know in French what they meant, I'm like, that sounds like that Latin word that I learned. And then if I looked it up, sure enough, that's what it was.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it helped me in my foreign language as well. And I had thought about taking Latin in high school. My high school offered Latin, French, and Spanish. And the kids that had been bullying me my whole life, they almost all of them were taking Latin, so I didn't take Latin. Because I'm like, I'm already bullied enough. I don't want to get bullied for having the wrong answer or because I'm in a class with them. And, what if it's a teacher that tolerates that kind of stuff? So I didn't take Latin.
Now here we didn't even have French. We had Spanish and German.
Yeah.
That's it.
Which, given where we're located, makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense given the surrounding area, but yeah.
And I think the reason why we had French and Spanish, just we had a lot of Hispanic folks, more from, Hispaniola, which is Haiti and the Dominican and Puerto Rico, and they all speak Spanish. And a lot of them moved up to New York when they do come to the U.S. And then Canada's right above New York, and Montreal still speaks French, and technically French and English are their official languages, so it made sense that we were learning French.
Yeah.
And I think that might have also been a holdover from, days gone by when lots of people spoke French, and, But anyway, so lost my place here. That's why I should have put my finger on the spot. So the Dinsmores eventually decided they were going to move to Omaha in 1881. And they were like, we would like you to go with us. And she was like, oh, heck yeah, I'll go. So she had $4.75 to her name, which today doesn't even buy you a cup of coffee at Starbucks.
Nope.
But at the time, that $4.75 was almost enough to pay for a teacher's certificate there, and then she thought maybe she could relocate to a country school. The problem was Dr. Fix didn't really like teaching, so she spent the next year and a half working as a nurse. So when she was still in Missouri, she was teaching, but this like it is still today. You move to another state, you need their teaching certificate, and you got to pay for it. So I don't know how she managed to work as a nurse. Maybe the training from Dinsmore was enough to get her foot in the door. I'm not sure, because it's just not there. But as she was working as a nurse, she was also attending the newly formed College of Medicine in Omaha. So when she graduated, she was the only woman in a class of 9 in 1883. So when she signed up, the original class was 9 kids. She was the only female. So she's already, blazing trails in that sense. She was known all her life to disturb conventions and soothe fevers, and medical school was no different. Her male classmates had argued at the time no woman of true delicacy would want to learn medicine, and they objected to having the company of any woman forced upon us who is disposed to unsex herself and to sacrifice her modesty by appearing with men in the medical lecture room. So they didn't even want her in the same room with them. Yeah. Ugh. So when she graduated, she opened an office in Omaha, and she considered this as her only cowardly act of her life. And she wrote in her little ledger, I feared to try my flight in new environments among the profession who were not my professors, she wrote. If I blundered, they would not tell and would help me out. So she opened this office because it was safe in Omaha and her professors knew who she was. So if she couldn't do something or screwed something up, she could go to them for help and they would help her. And they didn't tell anybody that she had made a mistake.
Oh, gotcha.
So she felt like she was a coward in doing that because she's a doctor. She has the degree. She can go do the work. And then she didn't go out too far and do the work. And you know, in a way, I can kind of understand that. You think about any job today, not any job, most jobs, you have some kind of mentor who helps you along the way. For me, the first year I was at the Star-Herald, Bart Shaneman helped me a lot and mentored me a lot in things. He didn't have to take that role. It wasn't an official role, but he did it anyway. Teachers usually have a mentor the first couple of years. Psychologists do, you know, to help them get going, get on the right track. Yeah. And it's why you often see, you know, once folks get their degree, a couple years later, they end up leaving because they're confident enough then that they can go out and do their own thing. So Dr. Fix felt like she should have branched out and not stayed local and just basically solve things on her own and not relying on other people. While in Omaha, she served on the Douglas County Medical Society as its vice president. So she also had other people there. She could go, oh, hey, you know, I got this patient Connor and I don't know how to fix this thing. And she, you know, so she had other people she could lean on too. She eventually came out west with her stepfather and her half-brother in 1886. They were heading out here to Homestead after having worked on the railroad construction gangs in western Nebraska, and I found an article that said it was near Callaway. But they had planned on homesteading in Cheyenne County. So again, we've discussed this in other podcasts, but Cheyenne County at the time was pretty much all of western Nebraska before it got broken up. It used to be really huge. And I often wonder if she came this far out to get away from and to make amends for what she felt was a cowardly act, but she still had some family here. And it also, to me, it also shows what her stepfather and stepbrother thought of her, because they were like, come out here with us. So it wasn't just like, hey, you're an adult now, we don't have to look after you anymore, you know, go away. Yeah. They obviously cared for her and wanted the best for her as well. So according to the book I mentioned by Muma, they arrived at Fort Sidney by train on a beautiful morning in May 1886. I tried really, really hard to find a date, and I couldn't find the exact date, just that it was in May, which makes me think everybody was quoting from this book because there's no specific date, and the oldest date that I found back was this book. But he, Muma obviously found it from somewhere. So George W. Fairfield, a government surveyor and an unofficial mayor of Tabor, which is now Minnetonka, met them at the station. Fairfield and others used Dr. Fix's presence as a doctor to try and lure other would-be homesteaders to settle in their town. And Fairfield, if you remember back to Scottsbluff's first murder, was involved in that as well, because same time, and he was the unofficial mayor. So Dr. Fix's homesteading was a little confusing to me, and hopefully I clear it up for everyone. She homesteaded on a piece of land near Minnetonka, and it was on a government homestead with a filing on a timber claim. But I found another source later that it was just the government homestead and the timber claim came a little later, so let me see if I can clear this up for everybody, because it was really confusing for me. Dr. Fix had written, I had the idea not to do things by the piece if I could take the loaf. So I took all I could, she wrote. And I think that quote is probably leaning toward the timber claim, because there was some legal ramifications there, and she eventually left that piece of land. So Dr. Fix also presumed pioneer blood must run through her veins, noting how no one ever really stayed out here. When she had originally arrived in town, another physician, Dr. Burney, was on his way out, and she wrote in her book, his courteous greeting was, "There comes another fool." And Dr. Burney had stayed only a year. He ended up leaving in disgrace after he refused to go out on a call on a stormy night. Because of this, she was sure no one would encroach on her territory, but she never imagined it would be a decade before another man would stay. She eventually did make a friend with another physician, and she wrote, in time, a lady physician was located about 25 miles away, and we became good neighbors, she wrote. So the two women that came out here stayed as physicians, but the men didn't. And they had limits to what they would do, and I guess it sounds like people might have ran Dr. Burney out of town because he wouldn't go out at night. Oh, it's a stormy night, it's raining, I'm not going out to help you. And she did. Every account I've come across is her, even the crappy roads that were out here, if you could call them roads, her buggy gets stuck and she's got 2 horses. And she usually had a driver with her. She would just take one of the horses off, and her and the horse would go off, and she would do her job and then eventually come back. She's like, the buggy's stuck, but, the emergency is still there. I still got to go.
Exactly, yeah.
And apparently the male doctors who came didn't do that. So there you go. Girls are better than boys. I'm just kidding. She lived in a one-room soddy with a board floor, and Dr. Fix wrote in detail how she was the envy of other ladies because her home had a real wood floor. The packing boxes she used to move out here with, she used to create furniture. So she had a wooden floor where most soddies was just the ground.
Dirt.
And she was like, well, I don't need this wood anymore. I'll make a chair.
Well, there you go.
So since she was still new in town, her main concern was how to reach patients once she found them. The only available animal was an old gray mule named Jack, who had spent his youthful days in the U.S. survey crew over this same region. And I found one account that said that Jack mostly was in the Wildcat Hills area. And I'm quoting here, with this venerable servant bedecked with bling bridle and blanket buckled on with a rope, and with my pills and powers, I mounted and marched forth to conquer, she wrote. The patient lived through the treatment, and I got more free advertising than I possibly could with a weekly paper backed with coin. So, she bought this old mule that the U.S. survey crew was like, we don't need him anymore. He's old. And he led her on many occasions out, and her first patient was fine. I don't know what was wrong with her first patient, but he was fine and lived. And she's right. That word of mouth is worth way more than what you would pay for an ad in a newspaper. Because you'll see an ad in a newspaper and be like, oh, there's a new doctor in town, okay. And then you don't really think much of it unless there's an emergency. And I did the same thing when I moved to town. I said, here's what my medical condition is. Who's the best doctor for that in town? I asked 5 people, and normally you would get 5 different answers. It was the same doctor, all 5 people. And I was like, okay, that's who I'm going to go to.
That often happens here. It's often like that. We all know who the good doctors are.
Yeah, and I figured Scottsbluff Gearing was small enough that they would know who to stay away from. So nothing's changed since, the late 1880s.
Nope.
It's still that way. If you move to town here, ask somebody questions. So one day she was returning home. She passed two cowboys, and Jack, her mule, tried to join in line with them because he's a pack mule. So he's trying to get in line and do his little pack mule things. And as she struggled to control Jack, a young cowboy rode toward her and asked if she wanted to trade. And indignantly, Georgia replied that she was quite satisfied with her steed. Those men later became her good friends, and she later told Ida that they had been good, gentle men. So I think they kind of probably were like, oh, look at this woman on this mule, can't even control a mule. And then she saw them frequently enough out doing her job that those two men became her friends. Yeah. Which is kind of cool. And Jack, her trusty steed, remained with her until the day she died. Dr. Fix also borrowed money to purchase a dog, which she rescued from its cruel master. I could not find exactly what the master had done to be cruel to the dog, but apparently the intonation in the writings was that the dog was really being mistreated. So she borrowed money from somebody to go buy that dog. And she continued working, doing most of the driving herself, especially at night. But sometimes Nancy Roberts, a young girl who became Dr. Fix's chief cook, companion, and counselor, aided her. And then over the years, she eventually was like, yeah, I need drivers. So her husband was her driver, and Ben Gentry. And I'm sure you've heard of the Gentry family. Mm-hmm. Most of them were doctors. And I have to go back far enough, but this Ben Gentry might have been the first doctor here. It might have been his brother, I'm not sure. But he's definitely related to the Gentry family because they all lived in Minnetonka together, and that's where all the Gentrys came from. She was rarely seen without her dogs, Jummy, Jack, and Shoddy. No idea where you get those names from. She was a huge lover of animals as well. And one day when some pranksters stole Ben Gentry's hen and gave it to her to have for dinner, she refused to kill it. She was like, that's his pet, Ben Gentry thought it was funny in Ida's little account of Dr. Fix. She wrote that, I think it was in Ida's account, she wrote that Ben pretended to be super angry and was going to take the boys to court for stealing their chicken. But he found the whole thing just absolutely hilarious. And I guess nobody was surprised that she refused to kill it because she was like, that's Ben's pet. I'm not killing his pet. Life was also sometimes scary as a single woman, especially when she returned home late at night and in the dark. If you've ever been out in the dead of night, no lights, nothing but the moon to guide you, and you can hear coyotes howling, you can imagine what it was like for Dr. Fix. She tried to think of these times as character building rather than let her fear control her self-confidence. And
they just had a coyote attack recently. I don't think it was around here, but I thought I heard about that on the news.
Oh, I missed that one.
Someone got attacked by a coyote.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's still possible. Mm-hmm. And we had the story that we just did on Bill Grasmick, where he had to walk home 8 miles. Mm-hmm. And he heard the coyotes too, and that's what I thought of when I thought of this. But at least she was on her horse and buggy and could go a little faster.
And they commonly leave you alone. They're not known to go. They're scavengers. They're not like wolves. They usually don't hunt that way. But I don't know if they get hungry enough.
And we also, because we're used to paved roads and stuff, we're used to paved roads and lights on our cars and stuff. And she just has a buggy and a horse, and they were road. Dirt at best. Mm-hmm. So I can see where she would be scared, but she chose to use that as a character building time rather than be scared and afraid to do her job and lose her confidence in being able to do her job.
Well, we're telling this story one day after, or at least we're recording this story one day after the shortest day of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So lots of darkness.
Yeah, it would have been particularly scary this time of year, coming around like 4 o'clock. It's already getting pretty dark.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So until she married Nathaniel Gwynn Fix on December 9th, 1888 at Fort Sydney, she lived alone other than her female companion who kept house for her. And that was, oh my gosh, my brain's not working today. We just mentioned her longtime companion that lived in the house. But other than that, she lived alone and she did things on her own. And she was very independent. And do you see where I'm going with the marriage? She met Gwynn when she was in Sydney to testify in the Burton Arnold murder case. And that's Scottsbluff County's first murder. And remember, it started in Sydney and then got moved here. Yeah. And she had gone down there to give testimony because she was actually there and examined Mr. Burton's body while it was still in his house. So Gwynn was suffering from typhoid, and she was his doctor, and they became friends, and then they decided to date. Gwynn was from somewhere around Dalton and was apparently from a well-to-do family. He worked as a clerk at the D.W. White store at Camp Clark, which Camp Clark no longer exists, other than a tiny bit as a tourist attraction. They were well known and had many friends, though they weren't too fond of the noise. In one edition of the Baird transcript, it was noted, Mr. and Mrs. Fix are at home to their friends. They say that they had no idea there were so many infernal tin can bands in the county, as the bands have made life a miserable burden for them since they too were made one. So they basically have been saying since they got married, they hear these dang bands all the time and people making noise. And I know if you're out...
Nothing else to do out here.
Exactly, that's what I was just going to say. Got nothing else to do, it's getting dark, I play the banjo. She didn't like that.
I love that. I think that'd be quite enjoyable.
Yeah. It'd be interesting to hear something different every night. And I mean, I would assume they were pretty good at it too. It probably wasn't a bunch of, 7-year-olds just learning to play the banjo or violin.
Right, at least you'd hope not.
Yeah. Oh, God.
I hope someone would have shut those people up. It's like, no, you can't play. No.
I remember when I was learning to play the drums, my grandma would, she would yell upstairs. And she'd be like, how much longer are you going to be doing that racket? like, yeah, I got 10 more minutes, Graham. Okay. Because we had to practice 30 minutes a day.
Yep.
And then she would also say sometimes when she got home from work, did you do your practicing yet today? I'm like, no, we'll go up there and start that racket so it'll be over before dinner time. Okay. But she made sure I learned to play. And then eventually she stopped calling it that racket.
Right, it started to become good.
Because it, I know some people think just making drum sounds isn't anything other than noise, but there are patterns. And
I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
People who play the drums are amazing. The fact that you're using almost all your body parts, which a lot of other musical instruments you don't use your legs, but you have to use your legs and your arms, all 4 of them to keep going. It's incredible to watch drummers.
And one thing I've always been super fascinated by, I was never able to manage double bass drumming. I couldn't get all 4 going at the same time. And then John Bonham, who was the drummer for Led Zeppelin, people thought he played with a double bass drum, and he only used 1 foot. And I was super amazed at how he made 1 foot sound like 2.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So I was never on that elite level. I mean, I was okay, I was decent, and I had a band, but there are still drummers out there that absolutely amaze me. And when you see, like 3, 4, 5-year-olds play Rush or Led Zeppelin.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, what? But I didn't start till I was 9, so that's my excuse. And here in Gearing, you don't start till 5th grade, 6th grade.
Yeah, no, you don't, not really, unless you had some private tutor to help you out
Yeah.
before. And if you came from, like, when I went to a rural school, you didn't get any musical education whatsoever, except maybe just singing. You did your singing, which would really, unless you were a singer, wasn't much. But you really didn't get any musical instrument education.
Yeah. When I tell people that, at the end of 3rd grade, we went into the gym and the band director was like, this is a trumpet. This is what it does. This is how you have to hold it. This is what it sounds like. This is a trombone. And they did it with every instrument. And then you went up and you tried things out. And I wanted to be a saxophone player, and I don't have the lung capacity for it. I'm blowing into the dang instrument and no sound's coming out. So we switched the trumpet, and I couldn't do that either. And I was like, well, I do like the drums, and I was decent enough. I was the second best kid in my school.
Yeah.
And could I have been better? I don't know, because Mom was poor. And my drumsticks cost $7, and the stick pad to practice on, I think, was $12, and that was a lot of money for Mom. That's almost a month's groceries for the 3 of us. And Brian had a mom and a dad who worked, and Brian had private lessons, and Brian had a drum set.
Yeah.
So it does make a difference. It's a very, very small thing in, my long life, but it is a small example of the difference between rich and poor.
Yeah, there's a huge discrepancy, huge.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm quite impressed in this town that we have such good marching band. I can hear them from my house. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it gets a little annoying, but we have a pretty decent marching band out here, but you can... And I think you were required to, at least in the middle school, by the time you're in 5th grade, to do what you just said, to go and try an instrument. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to do at least a year of practicing, if not more. But again, I skipped over all that. But that's a huge, even that, and it really wasn't even necessarily that because I was poor. It was just a discrepancy in education, and we just, I didn't have that. So by the time high school came, I couldn't play an instrument.
Yeah.
I didn't start learning how to play guitar until later in my high school, like when I was closer to a senior. So, yeah.
And it worked out for my mom because, she wanted to encourage me because I really did enjoy music. Mm-hmm. And she was like, I'm going to have to do a payment plan. I don't know how I'm going to do this, because she couldn't just buy an instrument outright. So the $19 for sticks and a practice pad was way cheaper than like $1,200 for an instrument.
Yeah.
So it worked out for her in that sense, but she didn't tell me no. She was like, we'll figure it out. And at that point in time, we didn't have loaner instruments. As I got older, by the time I was in high school, they did have some loaner instruments for the elementary kids. Yep. But when I was in elementary school, they didn't. But yeah, I mean, that gap was also evident when you speak marching band. When we would go away for the weekend, and we would go right after school on Friday and come back Monday morning at like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Mm-hmm. And we're at competitions all weekend. You need food. Yep. My friends are going, so you didn't have meals at McDonald's and Burger King then. You bought everything separately. The meals didn't come till I was an adult. Eventually, all fast food went that way with, I want a number 2. And I could afford a cheeseburger, which was 49 cents. And sometimes I had to get the hamburger, which was 39 cents. And, my friends are getting a Big Mac, a fry, and a large drink. And I'm relying on, I had a water bottle, and I would have to remember to fill it up before we got back on the bus, or I didn't have anything to drink. And there were times where we stopped for dinner, and I would eat my cheeseburger, and I didn't have anything to drink with it. So even though we stopped for dinner, there were many times I went out at competitions because we had them at night as well, and I didn't have any food. Yeah. And so I'm going hungry, and I have to plan, okay, I had lunch at school today, I'm not going to eat dinner tonight, but I have enough money to get lunch tomorrow but not dinner tomorrow, and then I can go hungry on Sunday. We'll be back late, and when I get home, I can get a PB&J when I get home.
Yeah, that's terrible.
And a lot of my bandmates had money for food everywhere, and also for extra food, because when you went to these competitions, sometimes there were 20 bands competing. And this is every weekend from the first weekend in September till just before Christmas. And they would have eaten lunch. We're at a competition. It's 4:00. We're not going to get dinner till 6. They're hungry. They go buy a hot dog. I didn't have that option. And it's, sometimes people would give me, some money to go get something if they knew I was really hungry. But by and large, I didn't eat a lot that weekend. And if we stayed overnight somewhere, other band parents would put you up. And they usually fed you dinner, so it was like pizza, so I would have something. And you would know before you left that was going to happen. So I'm like, okay, so if I get pizza for dinner tonight at like 9 o'clock when all the competitions are over, they're probably going to feed me breakfast. I don't need to pay for lunch tomorrow somewhere, so I could save my money.
That would been hard. I was very grateful I never had that hard of a life. We never starved. We always had plenty to eat.
I think if I had said something to my mom would have found a way, but I also knew that for her to find a way, it meant she was going without, and I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
So to take that back to Dr. Fix, she accepted whatever payment she could take, and I get to that later on here in the thing. But there was one person that she had helped, the husband, and the wife was like, I don't know how we're going to pay you. And Dr. Fix was fairly religious, and she said, don't worry, God will take care of it for me, and let's just sit and pray. So the woman's husband would have died if Dr. Fix hadn't saved him. And that's just who she was. She was like, that's all right. Don't worry about it. And my story was a long way to get back to Dr. Fix. And because of that, she had a strong reputation as a reliable physician, and she traveled all over the North Platte Valley. According to a May 1889 news item of the day, the headline read, "Under the care of Dr. Arbuckle Fix, any person can expect to be nearly raised from the dead." She did write in her ledger that she absolutely hated that people were making her out to be a saint because she's not that good. But she was a really good doctor, and she stayed. And so because she stayed, she probably also knew people. So, okay, Connor, this is the third time this month you've called me about this same thing. We've tried this and this and this. Let's try this. So she also knew her patients fairly well, and she traveled in a 75-mile radius from Scottsbluff. So she saw a lot of people, and we didn't have roads, people.
Nope.
So when she had arrived in the valley, just to give you a little sense of how much time quickly changed, when she arrived in the valley, this whole area was more rattlesnakes and prairie dogs than people. And she watched it become a good place for a man with limited means to invest if he is willing to use both brains and body. And so I think she's using man in the general sense, because she did the same thing. She eventually moved on from her first homestead, but she used her brain and body,
excuse me,
bless you, to do her job, to do her job well, and to advance in life. And she's basically saying, you can come here with nothing, because she pretty much did come out here with nothing. And you can make it. You know, I don't know if that's necessarily true anymore today, but at that point in time, it absolutely was. So Dr. Fix and Gwen eventually moved from that homestead she was on to a tree claim in the Red Willows Canyon, 7 miles east of Baird. So when she came here, she was in Minnetonka, and now she's moved a little bit east to Baird. And like I said, the documents I was reading, it seems like a couple of them might have mixed the two claims together. I think they were two separate homesteading places that she was on.
Gotcha, not like someplace in between.
Yeah. So there was a little bit of a legal to do with this plot of land and cattle. It's an interesting thing because this plot of land had 2 homestead filings on it. Mrs. Ingram, known as the Chimney Rock Lady, had a filing for a Jersey cow ranch on this property, but Dr. Fix had the earlier filing. So it should have been Dr. Fix's land, and somebody didn't do the paperwork right at the courthouse. Both of them had houses erected on the property, but the sons of Mrs. Ingram had torn down the house at their mother's suggestion. So basically, the mom's like, yeah, we tear the house down, Dr. Fix will leave. And that's kind of what happened. Bastards. Dr. Fix was completely devoted to her work, which she employed that 100% of her brains and body, and she moved her office to Gearing. You know, why live in Baird when Gearing is a little more central when you think of how big the North Platte Valley is and Cheyenne County at the time? Scottsbluff Gearing is a little more central to that. Yeah. And her husband nagged her about giving up her career and become a housewife, and this was a constant ongoing thing all the time. And one article noted that she established her practice with a determination that matched the strength of her husband's protests. So he's constantly telling her she needs to quit and be a proper housewife. She's like, no, I'm a doctor. She gets this piece of land, and, they basically destroy her house on purpose, so she'll leave. So she does. She goes to Gearing, but it ends up working out really well for her there. Ultimately, Gwen and George's marriage fell apart. They were divorced in 1909, ending 20 years of marriage, but they had only lived together as husband and wife for 4 years. So she tried to make it work for 4 years, and then she basically was just like, no, whatever. And then it just took forever before she ended up suing him for divorce, and we'll get to that in a minute here too. There had always been talk that Gwen was no good. Like, people would just say, oh, he's no good. He's no, like, if your mom says, don't hang out with Connor, he's no good. You know what that means. Mm-hmm. But no one ever explained what it meant, just that he was no good. There was just constant admonishment of her and her career that she wasn't what he wanted her to be, which to me sounds silly because he knew what she was when they met. He had typhoid, for crying out loud, and she nursed him back to health as his doctor. And now, okay, I'm better now. You can't be a doctor anymore. So when Dr. Fix sued for divorce, Gwen took 100 head of cattle that she had received as fees from patients, and then said that she had been inappropriate with her drivers. And we all know what that means, which was not true. And he implied it toward female and male drivers because he wants the cattle. And he's ticked that she's got the balls to divorce him. She's a woman. She's suing for divorce. You can imagine how that went if he's a demanding man telling her how she should be. People still do that today. There's a reason why there's a thing called revenge porn on the internet. People still do that
Yes,
today.
it's horrible.
Instead of saying, okay, yeah, the relationship didn't work out and move on with life, they have to get back at somebody. So he ended up with the 100 head of cattle. Great dude. You got cows. Go look after them. Whatever. You lost a really nice lady. Whatever. So Dr. Fix had a lot of what was known at the time as inpatients, and those were patients that needed a place to rest and recover from their ailments and or diseases. And she worked for a couple of years out of an old brick building or an old brick schoolhouse in Gearing before having a frame barn moved from Minutair to Gearing, which was renovated into a sanitarium, and another frame building from Gearing was attached to it, and this was her office. A neat tidbit to this story is that they moved that frame building over the river, because you and I were both thinking, how'd they get it over the river? They moved it over the river in the winter of 1894 when it was frozen and easier to do. So they just picked it up and carried it over the river. The sanitarium was the first hospital in the area, and it was located on the corner of 9th and O Streets in Gearing. Stories from the sanitarium include Dr. Fix purchasing food for a mom and her baby when they had nothing, and encouraging her friends to save their worn bed sheets, which could be torn up, for bandages. So the mom and her baby, basically the mom showed up, delivered the baby, and then she's like, well, we don't have any food. And Dr. Fix went and spent her own money to get food for both of them. And that's just who she was. All the accounts you read, she did. This wasn't an uncommon thing for her. Mm-hmm. If her patients needed help, she would help them. And then she was just like, "Hey, friends, don't throw out your old bed sheets. We can cut them up and use them for bandages." So, again, her ingenuity in a place where you don't have boxes of Johnson & Johnson bandages. So she accepted money when people could pay her, and that's what she preferred, but she would take wood for her stove, wild fruit, chickens, eggs, home-brewed wine, and, of course, cattle, because her husband took all the cattle. So she basically didn't care. She wasn't like, I'm not going to treat you, Connor, because you don't have any money.
Right.
My friend Connor has eggs, and him and his mom both have chickens, and they give me eggs for free. And they're not my doctor; they're just my friends. So I'm guessing chickens laid eggs back then like they do now, and you're always like, Irene, do you need more eggs? Mm-hmm. That's how it is. Except for in the winter, Kim did give me some eggs, and she said they're starting to slow down. I'm like, that's okay. Paul's going on winter break from the school district, so he won't be eating an egg every single day in his lunch. But chickens lay a lot of eggs, and if you have a lot of chickens, even in the winter when it slows down, not a lot of eggs. And Dr. Fix is helping people all dang day. She ain't got time to tend to chickens. So if people want to give her eggs or an already dead chicken for dinner, here you go. We'll take it. So Georgia also saw no point in embroidery. This I found in a bit where they were talking about her husband nagging her about becoming a wife, and that she would watch other women do embroidery, and she just didn't see a point in it. She was quoted as saying, "Why waste time putting fancy stitches in a piece of cloth?" I'm with you, Dr. Fix. It doesn't matter to me. Her fur hat and long black coat made from cowhide was all she needed. And after her mule Jack died, she borrowed money so she could have 2 teams of horses always at the ready, just in case one team was worn out from traveling. And I would barely call them roads. She traveled on the roads, but they're really not roads. And if it rains, you're kind of screwed. You can still go, but not in your buggy anymore, and you have to be very careful with your horse.
Yep.
When the road was impassable, like I said before, she often would just detach a horse and leave her buggy and other horse behind. And the thing is, no one stole her buggy and other horse, even if she was by herself, because they knew it was Dr. Fix's buggy and horse and that she'd be back. Don't be taking her horse. When she moved to Gearing, she brought her pony team and buggy, her medicine kit, her books and household goods, and her dogs. And you can see, like, it's just the basic stuff: her books for medicine, her stuff she needs for work, and her dogs. Mm-hmm. And then she would just go out in a 75-mile radius, racing around in her custom buggy. And there were descriptions in some earlier writings of seeing her, tearing off through town to go help somebody. So she didn't just, get on her buggy and la, 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 la. It was like, get on the buggy, these horses are going, and get out of my way. And that's just who she was. There is much more to Dr. Fix's life. But we're going to stop here for today, and in part 2, we will talk further about what else Dr. Fix did in town, including the famous silver dollar story. For now, I'm Irene.
And I'm Connor.
And this is Storytelling on the Plains.